So, welcome to today's program. My name is Dr. Brian Van Brunt, and I am the Director of Behavior and Threat Management at DPREP Safety Division. I believe this is the Dark Fox series, is looking at the issue of incels or involuntarily celibate individuals. Those of you who are observant will notice that there is just me, and Dr. Taylor was unable to join us. He sadly had some personal medical stuff going on with his dad and is taking care of him, and was very sad to not be here because I know this is a favorite topic of his. I will use this opportunity to talk about him throughout the program and make him feel guilty for this. So that'll be a tone that we'll have all the way throughout. All right. So this is a topic when we do these kind of programs. One of the things I'll share with you right up front is that these are summary programs on this topic. So we have a larger program in a 90-minute capacity. I have one that we do for like a half day, just related to threat assessment. I've also done this work related to the issue of how do we change folks who have this philosophy. In fact, the book that we wrote for Taylor and Francis has followed a couple of our books' approaches, in so much as it's been a focus not just on identifying the problem, like our white supremacy violence book, but really also hinting at some of the solution. What do we do with these behaviors? How do we treat these individuals, and how do we help them? So typically the first half of the program is really dedicated to teaching some of the basic concepts, going over some of the core issues, and then breaking for some questions as we go through. So I'd encourage you, if you do have a question, to drop it into the chat, and we can do live questions around the half of the hour. Where's the bottom of the hour? Is that right? There's some great things in the chat if you're just joining us, just related to the topic here of Inceldom, kind of summarizing some of the research that we've done in this area, risk rubric or an indoctrination rubric that we came up with that should be a very useful adjunct or support related to a good threat assessment. And let me say that right from the beginning, just given the threat assessment nature of this. The rubric that we've shared with you really should be seen as a part of a larger assessment of risk, really narrowing down particular subject matter expertise. I'd say it the same way related to like white supremacist violence or written threat or social media threat. There's going to be a time in the general threat or risk assessment process where we're going to want to narrow down specifically on a content area. And I stumbled upon the term indoctrination, which I really like describing those who have white supremacist values or incel values or philosophy, because I do see it as an indoctrination. It's buying into a way of thinking that sometimes leads to violence. So let me say this right off the bat. It's a way of thinking that sometimes leads to violence. I don't have great data to say there's 10,000 incels, but only 3 of them have moved to violence. I think that's probably an accurate take on the statistical nature of it. Many of the people who have these beliefs don't act violently because of the beliefs. Many hold the beliefs or are toying with them, maybe at different developmental stages. The belief feels really strong and they resonate with it initially, but then find themselves over time really moving past that belief. I think in the white supremacist space, there's a number of folks who find themselves there as well. So Dr. Taylor and I, Chris and I, wrote this book. Very much enjoyed the writing of this, with a huge lift with Bethany helping us out on the research and collating all of those cases. This was the book that we didn't put her on the title, and I wish we did. And then when you look at the white supremacist book, you see that she's suddenly added, she's been behind the scenes in such an amazing way on all of this research and all of this work. In fact, I think she's developed a bit of a detailed knowledge base in some really dark areas as someone who's not a professional fully in the threat assessment space, but has a rivaled knowledge, I think, with some of the best in the field on these topics. I very much love the cover. We had to fight them for that. That was a rough argument. If you've ever written a book, you can appreciate the amount of hassle that you go through trying to choose a cover within the publisher's domain. So we had to fight for the red pill, black pill cover here, but it really does summarize some of the philosophy. So when I think about incel behavior, I want to start here with the idea that our general understanding of it as a binary system, as a either or, as a 0 or a 1. You are an incel or you are not an incel. I think we're past that now. It's much more accurate to see this as a spectrum of behaviors. I also will throw out a fairly controversial controversial comment here that might shock you, but I don't think it has to do about whether you're having sex or not. I think that's a separate issue here, that for true inceldom, it's really about some of this, what you see on the screen, this triangle of entitlement, this jealousy, looking out, in some ways, a FOMO, wanting things that other people have, and this underlying misogyny that I think is present in a powerful way. So if you look at inceldom and this concept, one of the things I'll start off with right from the beginning is encouraging you to shift away from seeing this as I'm an incel or I'm not an incel. I think it's a spectrum of behavior. And I think people get indoctrinated into that spectrum. Think about religion, Jewish or Christian or Muslim or Hindi, all of these relationships. You've met people who are Christian, but they're like, I believe it, but I'm not like going to church every week. So the idea of how far they've bought into a philosophy, I think, is a great way to understand inceldom, or the involuntarily celibate, to start. The other part that I will share here too, again, is it's not just about sex, that I think it goes deeper than that. It's very much about this idea and attitude towards women. I'll say this from the beginning as well. There's not really female incels, right? If we look at the same kind of research and literature, this is a male problem primarily. And it's also one that is housed within other hateful philosophies, things like white supremacist violence. Incels as a whole don't say things like, well, how do we feel about homosexual relationship? That they're seen as less than and problematic, and probably even stronger language. How do we feel about non-European white Caucasian standards of beauty? We don't like other people. Other people aren't beautiful unless you're white in this one particular way. That's what beautiful is. So to understand inceldom and the philosophy is to begin to understand such a narrow way of thinking that is so not only offensive, but I'm going to use the word nihilistic here. It's a snake eating its own tail. There's no incels after 35. Once you've hit this level of age, they're like, they're not young and attractive anymore. So the idea that inceldom somehow is something that's a valid philosophy, there's very little valid about it. It doesn't respect any type of diversity. It doesn't appreciate any type of disability. It doesn't see women as anything other than a sexual object. And even to that end, it doesn't allow for sexual orientation differences. It doesn't allow for anything related to again, European white Caucasian standards of beauty, that there's no one seen as beautiful except this one group that's pushed forward. Yeah, great question, Toby. And I'm actually going to break my rule and kind of answer it right now because it's such a great question. It reminds me of the Proud Boys scenario that's going on right now, where the person was just convicted, and I believe they're of Latinx or Hispanic. They are Latinx or Hispanic, and it's almost, it just boggles one's mind a little bit. Like, how do you buy into a white supremacist philosophy and be non-white? Like, is that really a thing to do? So, to your point here, when we look at folks who are Black or Asian or Hispanic, or they almost can't be incels because they're not following up to this standard of beauty, that it really is something that is solidly, but it's a shocking statement, similar to eugenics and a Nazi-like approach to white supremacy and white purism. That's how they see this. They see it as a genetic issue. And again, remembering that there's a spectrum here. These are the extremists in this space. So there's some variety here. But generally speaking, there's even language and names associated with those who are non-Caucasian, and seen as less than, things like soy boy, or things that we're hearing on popular media that are kind of working into our sitcoms now, or our cartoons. Anyone who's seen as non-Caucasian is seen, or non-white is seen as less than, which is part of the problem, I think, even beyond the incel belief. Chris and I came up with this image that I thought was I really like it a lot. And at the heart of the incel movement, and I'm not saying this to defend or to create sympathy for these individuals, but it really is the Pinocchio story. That at the heart of this, what we're dealing with are individuals who feel as if there's these real boys out there, there's the real people who get to experience life in a way that has been taken from them. And that their desire, more than anything else, is to feel alive. And the way they see this feeling alive is to be able to be in an intimate and almost possessive relationship with a woman who is beautiful. And this, and if you're following my arguments here, it's not even a woman who's beautiful and smart. It's just this external, this is what a Stacy is defined as, this external version of what beauty is. So there's no nuance to it. There's no fidelity. There's no excitement. There's no personality. There's no diversity in this. It's just, I want to possess someone who has this overly simplified version of what beauty means. And that, more than anything else, is going to fulfill a need in me that's lacking. So when we talk about, there's a term in the research community, and especially in the threat assessment space, that you're going to want to know, a cognitive opening. When we find someone who has almost like a compromised immune system, they're feeling hurt, they're feeling left out, they're feeling unsuccessful. You look at some of the threat cases related to inceldom. The Isle Vista attacker is one example of someone who, very eloquently would record these videos and say, I dress nice, I have these nice glasses, I dress in Prada, I put social media pictures up of me flying in a jet, yet women reject me. One of the cases that occurred before this was Collier Township. This was an attack at a LA fitness aerobics studio. This was an individual who actually quotes and says, "By or 60 million eligible women by my count, and all of them have rejected me." This is an older guy in his 40s who carries out this attack at our aerobics studio. And when I think about these more extreme outlier cases where people move forward to violence, what we're seeing is the violence is often directed at women themselves. We have the hot yoga studio example, the heat in terms of yoga, not like hot people doing yoga. We have the one occurring, as I mentioned, in Isle Vista and Collier County, and the list goes on, of individuals who are driven primarily. The Isle Vista attacker planned to attack the hottest sorority.
On the day of retribution, I am going to enter the hottest sorority house of UCSB. And I will slaughter every single spoiled, stuck-up, blonde slut I see inside there.
He talks about this in his manifesto. So the idea of punishing the people who've caused the rejection is a big drive here. And for those of you who are working in the K through 12 environment, you notice this in some of those males who have these problems connecting with other people. They feel like they've tried to date someone, they've been laughed at, they've had sand metaphorically kicked in their face, they feel rejected. In the psychology space, some cognitive dissonance, you understand this as some catastrophizing, that if you're taking most 13 to 16-year-olds who are entering dating phases, and if you have one that says, I've asked out 5 girls and they all told me to go pound sand, they weren't interested in me at all, I think I'm unlovable. Most therapists would say, what you're doing is you're taking a very small subset and you have way too many high expectations here. You have a low frustration tolerance. Every woman you ask out, you're not going to be successful with. The idea is that you ask out multiple women, that you try, that you might try and try again, eventually reaching some goal and finding someone who might connect with you. But even then, that connection might not happen immediately. It might stretch out over some time, might not be exactly what you're wanting. So the idea here that, especially in younger males and teenagers, they look around the world. I almost go back to Jean Kilbourne here, if you're familiar with her work related to how we look at women and how they're presented in society. That's only gotten worse with the advent and availability of pornography, the movement into gonzo pornography, where things are kind of more not reality-based, but in the same way that gonzo journalism is kind of in that gritty space, this amateur space, that we see young men looking out at what expectations that should be there for things related to relationships and dating, what makes them, what gives them value. And the problem that they're having is they're finding their everyday experiences aren't living up to what's in front of them. And to finish the Pinocchio metaphor here, he eventually becomes a real boy. He's very excited about this. And if you recall the story of Pinocchio, it's a rather dark. He wanders over into this pleasure island where he thinks, this is great. This is wonderful. And I think this is the end part of inceldom. Take the philosophy to its final conclusion, where we we end up in this space is very much in a headspace of I'm worthless. That because I age, because I can't maintain genetic perfection, or even we'll talk about the red pill, black pill thing in a moment, even for individuals who are in a red pill state, I guess we'll talk about it now. Red pill individuals, the term here refers to those who think through effort, money, prestige and location, they can set the scales right when it comes to the women that they can achieve. That's their language. That's how they would use it, that achievement, the possession of a woman for sexual desires. And for that individual, the idea of attaining that, maybe if they work out far enough, they get plastic surgery, calf implants, they become rich, they get the right sports car, they work on their social skills, that they could pass for someone who's genetically superior. The black pill individuals, they're at the stage where they're like, no matter what I do or say, society has set up genetically this poker game against me, and the house is always going to win. So that's where we see this movement towards violence, towards rage, towards anger, especially towards the women, but also the men who are often in relationships with what they would call sort of that ideal, the Stacy and the Chad idea here. And this love becomes elusive for them. So even if they find that in their mind perfect looking woman, they find that that doesn't really satiate in that same way. The Chad here definition is someone who has the genetically in their mind, again, very questionable definition, superior genetic appearance. And again, this is like white, European, muscular, in a very traditional, historical, limiting way, that this is how a person's value is obtained. And that Stacy's women are seen like this. They're seen very much in a very narrow way, and that these are the people that they're seeking to possess in many ways, because this also elevates their status. It fixes them. It helps them feel real. So the anger usually becomes towards the women, and that's where the focus of an attack plays out, or towards the men that we just discussed that don't deserve to be with a woman like that. So we talked a little bit about the red pill. Again, that's that movement towards, if you will, taking steps and actions to improve oneself to reach that goal. The black pill is much more, my life is over, I'm not going to be successful, what's the point? When we looked at our rubric, we really did a lot of research on this, read way too much information about very sad boys trying to figure out ways to reach some level of happiness. We found that these four categories were really the useful ones for us, like how people think about things, how they feel about things, some behaviors they engage in, and then the environmental factors that we see. And before we're done, I'll pull up that checklist for you so you can actually see how this would play out. Bethany has put those in the chat for you. And I've listed them out here for you. Look at that. I was ahead of the curve. So when we think about thinking, there's a misogynistic belief set. Often there's racism built right into this right from the beginning, because again, we're talking about their version of what's beautiful, and what's genetically perfect is very much this European centric white version. They often have this black pill buy-in. They have inaccurate self-concept. They see themselves only valuable based on physical appearance. And there might be this seeking of fame and acceptance by adulation from others. The feelings, I think, that go along with this, and I'll kind of move to feelings over here, what we see is a rage, a feeling as if everyone else is happy and has what they want. Look at this schlub. Look at this guy who is unattractive, who is clearly my genetic inferior, but he's with this beautiful woman. How did that happen? So there's a rage that fills that. And as they try to date other women or interact with women, women sense this and they're repulsed by it more often than not. And that leads to these feelings of hopelessness. And the individual then starts to catastrophize or create a catastrophe about their belief. I'm never going to get the person that is going to make me feel whole. I'm never going to become the real boy. This becomes disabling to the person. They feel less than, they can't function, they feel abandoned. And then I think the behavior is a good place to start here. When we see the thinking and the feelings, good cognitive behavioralists says these lead to behaviors, right? So what we see is some of the threatening behaviors, some of the howling that we talk about. Howling is a good way to talk about trolling or conveying a transient threat to others, maybe suicidal statements, maybe referencing past attacks, or engaging in some red pill behavior, still trying to figure out a way to find connection. In the Collier County attack, there's some disturbing videos of the attacker going to, I think it was a Ramada Inn, where there was a man called Ron Steele, which is just a horrible person, would prey upon men who were older who wanted to date younger women. And he said, I have a system for you. I'm going to make it so that you can date these young women. And there's videos of him actually talking with and training and having these men interact with college students, like how they might ask them out, how they might take them to dinner, how to make them, if I can, seem less creepy to the younger women. And we actually see the attacker in some of these videos working on these goals. Ultimately, in this attacker's profile, and we kind of look back on it as I've studied it, he was someone who, while he did have sex with women and he actually had a couple relationships that went okay, they were never what he wanted. They were never enough to offset his negative feelings about himself. So this led him down this path. And we look at the Isle Vista attacker, which is the two major attacks we look at in the book. We see the creation of some of these incel materials, people studying and looking at these people, calling the attacker the father of the incel movement. We see the rejection, the bullying they suffered under, the failure to change, and then life falling into this spiral, this free fall, if you will. So we look at some of the past attacks. I mentioned Collier shooting in Pennsylvania, the Isle Vista attack here as well, the truck attack in Toronto, all of these, the hot yoga studio attack in Tallahassee, all of these attacks have clear tie-ins to inceldom. The massage parlor killing for me was an interesting one because it wasn't really captured as an incel attack because people said, well, he was sleeping with people, he was having sex, so he's not really an incel. This is where I go back to the philosophy that this is someone who saw very much women as less than. This was the one who felt like because he was having sex with these women in the massage parlors, that he was less than as a Christian. He was having premarital sex. He felt horrible about himself. So then he sees the destruction of these women as some blaze of glory or escape behaviors that he's engaged in. So while there's some extreme cases like these, I do think where we're running into these cases much more commonly is the lower level of the inceldom. Someone who feels as a younger male, especially in a K through 12 setting, they feel as if I'm someone who isn't getting my needs met. The idea of them being angry at women for harming them becomes part of that. I'll put the video up there on the site or have Bethany do that for us, but I think that's an important piece when we look at this, trying to understand, in this case, the Elliot Rodger video. I don't love using his name, but it's a useful reference. Watching that video that he posted, it's something out of central casting related to inceldom. So when you watch the video, if you're a threat assessment expert, I'd encourage you to watch it because it within like a 10-minute video, it summarizes every single risk factor we understand related to threat and dangerousness. And it really does, you hear his language almost going through the indoctrination scale. And in the book, one of the things that we did is we actually scored someone like Elliot Rodger, and then George Sedini was the one from Collier County. We actually scored them on that scale just to demonstrate how we might use it in an overall threat perspective. So I'll pull these up for you just so you can take a quick look at them, and then we'll kind of break for questions and see if y'all have any as we're going forward. Let me just I like this one because if you're a researcher, I've shared this with just dozens of graduate students and individuals. What you see here is the levels of thinking. Here's the misogynistic thinking, racism. So all of these are explained. And then all these numbers here, and again, maybe there's like 3 of you interested in this, but certainly researchers are very interested in what cases I would consider have incel attack or overview pieces here. You look at these, you're like, wow, these are like 50 of them, Brian. That's surprising to me. Not every case, the ones I showed you on the screen, like Collier County and Isle Vista and Toronto, these were clear, singular motivated incel attacks. The ones here, though, when I look at them, they had what I would describe as incel adjacent behaviors where the misogyny towards women or other standards came up more clearly as we went through. So that's why they're here. And then there's some great references related to this topic that we used for the book. So it's kind of like a one sheet for y'all just to be able to look at and have a good understanding of. I really do want to stress that when we think about the scoring guide, one of the things that you want to think about here is that this should always be seen as like an adjunct or a support to an existing threat assessment. This should not be the threat assessment. If you're familiar with some of my previous work, it would be like using the VRAW or Looking Glass or violent threat assessment tools, or even ERIS, Extremist Risk Intervention Scale, using one of them as just the threat assessment. We always want to look at things in a wider and larger capacity. So in Dark Fox, all of these qualities are worked in and blended into the Dark Fox system as well as the Pathways system. We really moved away from having standalone. We had like 8 at one point, like standalone threat assessment tools. Now they're blended into this one expert system. But if you look here, what we're seeing on the guide, it's these same levels, but we actually have not present, minor traits, moderate traits, major traits, fully present. So it gives you the ability to come up with a quantitative score for an individual when you're looking at issues of misogyny, racism, black pill philosophy. And I think it's a good step in the right direction to be able to quantify this question: how far down the rabbit hole? I know I'm mixing my Pinocchio and Alice in Wonderland metaphors here, but how far down the rabbit hole has the individual fallen in this incel space? And even more importantly than the assessment of risk here, and in our other programs, we get into this a lot more, and certainly the back half of the book, we look at about 5 different case studies. What we're looking at here is, given someone is growing and connecting in this space, how do we counteract? And I do think in the therapeutic space, there's a lot of opportunities to help bring about change for this individual, to help them really consider what they're looking for, what's lacking in their life, and where these problems are coming from. That's really critical. All right. So what I'll do here is I'm going to end the recording, and then we'll kind of open it up for Q&A. If anyone has some questions or things I can dive into, we'll go from there.